One of the very first scenes shows us that the Spartans, quote-unquote, discard every baby that isn't born within what they consider their ideal measures. If they consider the newborn has a propensity to get sick, they also get rid of it. That explains why all these Spartans seem to have the same height. But given that the children will later experience another natural selection in a harsh location known as the Agoge, where, said by the narrator himself, many could end up dead, wouldn't it be better to let the Agoge act as the natural selection itself? Why waste so many potentially good warriors in such a cruel way? Flash forward 6 or 7 years, and we see that Leonidas has grown quite a bit. I really want to remark how tough Kid Leonidas looks. The actor truly did an outstanding performance. Just look at his eyes. When I grow up, I want to be like that kid. One of the details that stood out the most to me during this scene is the musculature of the man instructing Leonidas. His physique is weird. It's the only Spartan we see in the whole movie with muscles of such size. And as I said, the Spartans were not what you would call diverse. Everyone had more or less the same height, the same fighting style, and endured the same training, thus possessing roughly the same lean muscular physique. But there is not another single Spartan in the whole movie with muscles such as the ones of this guy. There must have been a reason to cast this actor specifically for this scene and not another, but I honestly can't think of what it could be. It doesn't seem to serve any storytelling purposes. And it gets only weirder when you realize this man is possibly Leonidas' father, because in a later scene we see Leonidas doing the same type of sparring with his son. But enough discussion about this actor. The choreography of this scene is as sharp as the warrior's sword. Kid Leonidas doing a back roll to avoid being knifed, even if the thrust was just a feint, is one of the coolest bits of imagery in the entire movie. And that's really saying something.
At age 7, the boy was taken from his mother and plunged into a world of violence.
Well, if the fight with that big Spartan wasn't already a big dose of violence for a 6-year-old, I don't know what can be, to be honest. You could say that it's different because the muscular fellow wasn't taking it seriously, and there were only stakes for Leonidas. But that's the point, there were stakes for Leonidas. I guess that punching another fellow 7-year-old to death is more impactful, but dodging sword slashes was not the average Tuesday when I was in first grade, at least for me. Overall, this seems pretty similar to the training of the Unsullied, but more thought out. The Unsullied army is one of the most notable and legendary in the world of A Song of Ice and Fire, or Game of Thrones for friends. The Unsullied are similar to the Spartans in more than one way, but there is a core difference, one that is actually an issue of George R.R. Martin's writing. Unsullied training begins when the boys are 5 years old. Some are selected to be Unsullied as infants and castrated right then, though any slave boy up to the age of 5 may be later selected to be made into an Unsullied, and then castrated. The training regime is utterly brutal, and because of this, only 1 out of every 4 boys survives until the end. To complete his training, each Unsullied is sent to Astapor's slave market, where he must purchase an infant, end its life, and compensate the child's owner before returning to the barracks. I know what you're thinking, and don't worry, we will soon go over how absurd this training regime is. But first things first, I want to give it to George R.R. Martin, where he does deserve it, because in the actual, historical, real Sparta, each Spartan had to get away with killing a helot, a Spartan slave. So what we have just read about the Unsullied might just be more accurate to the actual Spartan history than the training regime that we see in 300. But of course, George R.R. Martin is obsessed with edginess, and he has to add the bit about the systematic ending of babies' lives. Why a baby? What's the point of that?
Oh, they will learn to be heartless. They've got to learn that they live in a cold
We've heard
world.
you. We've heard you. Let's address the elephant in the room. Why in hell would you castrate children that you want to turn into the ultimate warriors? And especially when they are at such a young age. They try to justify this decision by saying that doing it this way, they are not as controlled by desires such as bloodlust or sexual urges. And, well, it is true that they may not feel those impulses as much as a non-castrated individual, but the absence of any kind of hormonal-induced masculine physical development is not worth it at all. But humans are humans, and not because you castrate them, you are going to stop them from having a hidden agenda. And being castrated doesn't magically give you David Goggins levels of discipline. Going back to Leonidas, once he becomes a teenager, he faces the hardest of trials. It isn't really explained, but we can infer that he's basically left for dead in the winter wilderness. He has no clothes, and not one single resource or tool at his disposal. I'm not going to talk too much about the comic, as I think the movie is one of the rare adaptations that improves the source material, but in this instance, the comic does actually a better job with the details. He's freezing to death, and the spear we see him with is one that he carved himself using a random piece of wood he found. You can tell that his spear was not a professional one, but in the comic it's even cooler because it's clear that the spear is actually just a stick. While he was resisting death by freezing, he faced a gigantic wolf. I'm talking about a wolf of almost his size, and his size by this age was almost his size at adulthood, because I believe we can safely guess that he was like 17 years old here. I know, it can be weird to see him with such a skinny physique, but the comic explains that he's been living off rodents and roots. We can presume he's been in this situation for a long time, maybe months. Enough time for his body to starve and get significantly skinnier, and we also need to take into account that most of his muscle development would probably happen in the latest parts of his formation as a warrior. Of course, I don't mean that a teenager cannot be muscular. That's obviously not true. It's more like in this movie's Sparta, you've got to earn the right for your muscles. If you see the physiques of the Spartans, you can be damn sure every single one of those muscle fibers will be put at use in the deadliest fashion possible. I find that philosophy to be really cool. Leonidas keeps his calm and corners the wolf into a trap, and then proceeds to impale it with his homemade spear in a cool sequence that it's an obvious foreshadowing and metaphor of what he will later do on a larger scale with Xerxes' army.
It's not fear that grips him, only a heightened sense of things, the cold air in his lungs, wind-swept pines moving against the coming night.
As Aurelius was on his own ark narrating this, those sentences make me want to go take a 20-kilometer run outside at 2 a.m. with shorts and a t-shirt to savor the cold air.
His hands are steady. His form.
The way in which he describes Leonidas killing the wolf gives me faith in humanity. It's the same vibes as the Toy Story 2 scene of Woody being repaired. Just an expert of his craft. You are watching a master at work. Watching this, I feel the way I feel with that audio of a girl talking about the BMW with Never Let Go of Me sounding in the background.
Built for racetracks, master of the road.
You know, once you start picking your head down the rabbit hole, the realism of 300, even if you only glance for half a second, you are gonna be overwhelmed by people talking about how unrealistic it is, how they didn't go to battle half naked, and how Leonidas was actually 60 years old when he was fighting in Thermopylae, and so on. But you know what? That's boring. I mean it. It's really boring. Those aspects of 300 may not be historically accurate at all, but I cannot care less. I want to believe, I choose to believe, that a warrior at the peak of human combat ability might have been able to pull off a killing spree like the one of my man Leonidas in this iconic scene. I want to believe in the combat prowess of the Spartans, and that's why today we are not going to talk about those things. I am going to discuss something I have never seen no one talking about, even though it's what always catches my attention the most whenever I watch the movie. How the film introduces plenty of downright fantastical elements and expects you to roll with it while giving no explanation whatsoever about them. It's really impressive once you start thinking about it for a bit. For example, at one point, a man with a goat head appears, and it is not a mask, he moves his facial muscles, his goat facial muscles. That gives me the same vibes as when the literal Virgin Mary appears in front of Polly in The Sopranos, just for it to never get addressed. Or you know, this wolf that Leonidas fights with is also a perfect example. I am 100% conscious that the only reason the wolf is portrayed in that way is because of the rule of cool. There's also an in-story explanation, the one that argues that all we see is Spartan propaganda, that we are observing the story through the lens of the exaggerated tale and biased eyes of the narration of Delius. It is true, the film goes out of its way to make us understand this. But you know what? Let me repeat my argument from about 30 seconds ago. I am not saying that it's incorrect because it's pretty much confirmed that it's the right way of viewing the story. I am not saying it doesn't make sense. But you already know that explanation. If you are here, it's because you want to hear me jab about what could be the inward reason of a wolf that size. So baby, let's get into it. There is absolutely no record of a wolf of such size ever existing. Not even the ones from the Ice Age could get this big. So it must be that it's either that these wolves inhabit the mountains of 300 degrees, or that this specific wolf is a legendary one renowned to roam these mountains, and that Leonidas was tasked with killing it with absolutely no resources. The latter might be the right explanation, because once he returned after killing the wolf, he was crowned King of Sparta. It is said by the narrator that he has got to return from the wilderness either a Spartan or not at all. So we can infer that the time in the inhospitable and dangerous mountain was his initiation as a Spartan. Maybe, due to his king's blood, he was tasked with also having to kill the wolf. Or maybe, because of his royal blood, you know, nepotism, once he finished his initiation as a Spartan, he would directly be crowned king. Who knows? It's weird. It doesn't sound meritocratic. Still, regardless of everything, him being crowned king, as a 17-year-old, wearing the fur of the wolf, more bone than muscle, with all the muscular, grown-up Spartans kneeling in his presence, is one of my favorite pieces of the film. And as you know, 300 is filled with cool moments like this. So when I say it's one of my personal favorites, it really means something. Trust me. Fast forward some decades, and the Persian Empire, led by King Xerxes, is marching to take Greece. Leonidas wants to face them. King Leonidas seeks the opinion of the Ephors, because without their support, Sparta will not be able to go to war, because the authority they exert is beyond kingship. Leonidas has to meet them as well as the oracle where they live, and unfortunately, that place is the very top of a mountain, one that is not only high, but also inaccessible. It's pretty much a vertical wall, and Leonidas climbs it without sparing efforts. He climbs an entire vertical mountain at night just to assist a meeting. And he did all of that just for the Ephors to end up rejecting his call for defense against Xerxes, and for them to tell him to go back where he came from. And it's pretty much implied that he has got to do the same climbing to get down. Just imagine how dangerous it must be. And Leonidas has got to do it again after receiving a harsh rejection. It is probably even more dangerous when going down. My man was really not given any breaks. The Ephors were represented as a bunch of deformed monstrosities. And unlike other characters with disgusting and mutant-looking appearances, we actually do have an explanation for why they are the way they are. The narrator claims they are
Priests to the old gods, inbred swine.
And it caught my attention that they were also said to be priests of the old gods. Now, what could this mean in this context? It's probably referring to the chthonic gods, the ones before the Olympian gods, the ones known in popular culture. Or maybe it refers to older Indo-European deities that preceded the existence of the state of Greece. This could make sense, because although the film uses the term old gods merely to make the Ephors seem creepy and primitive, there is a genuine historical and mythological basis for this theory. The festival they interfere with, the Carneia, is a good example of religious syncretism. It's a tradition derived from the worship of older Indo-European deities. It's funny to see the egregious way in which the Ephors are displayed when you learn that in real life they were just an annually elected group of Spartan citizens. It was basically just a bunch of regular taxpayers who were there to make sure the kings didn't go crazy with their measures, and they were renovated annually to avoid corruption. Leonidas rightfully ignores the Ephors' advice. He ignores the law, claiming that it has become corrupt and no longer serves the ideals Sparta was built upon. And he marches to war, but he's only able to recruit 300 men. When confronted by Jimmy McNulty, he jokingly says that 300 are just his personal bodyguard. What's interesting is that in the 1962 movie, The 300 Spartans, which served as the main inspiration for the comic 300 by Frank Miller, from which the movie 300 was directly adapted, the 300 Spartans are really the bodyguard of King Leonidas, and he doesn't break the law by marching with them. Once they reach Thermopylae, there is a moment that has always been really memorable to me. They find an almost infinite fleet of Persians. It's funny if you compare it to the Persian army of the 1962 film. I don't have nothing but love for old films. I generally think they are better than the ones made nowadays. But in this specific instance, the 1962 300 Spartans is disappointing in a lot of ways. This is one of the best examples of underwhelming moments. Xerxes says,
At a marathon 10 years ago, he sent a mere wave. I am leading an ocean!
But what the camera shows looks more like a school's 4th grade going out to a local museum. The Spartans rejoice watching a Persian ship sinking due to the harshness of the waters, and they nonchalantly decide to spend what looks like maybe the next 12 hours in the same spot without sitting nor moving in any way, just to delight themselves with the sights of the Persians suffering by the hands of the thunderstorm. A thunderstorm that they withstand without caring at all. This shot of everyone laughing hysterically while my man Leonidas seems almost upset by the fact that the gods are stealing his kills goes unbelievably hard. Picture the situation. They don't care at all about the thunderstorm. And I know, we've all been there. I myself enjoy thunderstorms like one of life's greatest pleasures. But one thing is standing beneath one for 20 minutes, and another is being below a thunderstorm for the entire night shirtless. They have 100% certainty that they are not going to get sick, and not only that, they are sacrificing a night of sleep, and they couldn't care less. Next morning, the Spartans proceed to build their phalanx. The Persians send a messenger to order them to surrender. One last chance. And just before covering what happens immediately next, let's take a moment to appreciate this guy's positioning. He's what, 200 meters away? And still, some random Spartan manages to accurately impale him with his spear. And think about it, the Spartan that does it must be one from the center of the formation, behind the front line, because if he was from the front line, he could not afford to lose his spear just before the charging of the enemy. So that guy, while way behind, took a rough look at the enemy, hundreds of meters away, and said, "No problem, chief." Boom! Speared! And of course, the soundtrack of this scene, with the endless waves of Persians marching, is just chef's kiss. It feels like the Spartans are facing a truly divine rival. They are opposing divine intervention. It gives me the same vibes as the Attack on Titan soundtrack of the first seasons. Fast forward one of the greatest action scenes ever. I'm not going to cover it, because I think that it doesn't need my commentary. It speaks for itself. After the battle, we see Leonidas chilling while eating an apple. It's a small detail, but it has always felt important for me. It's just so cool. He acts like everything that has happened is no big deal. He eats an apple, and that's enough for him to have energy for the next day and the upcoming battles. He doesn't need more. Meanwhile, Xerxes' soldiers are probably performing blood rituals just to try to be a bit stronger before facing the Spartans. All the while, Leonidas is just there, eating an apple. Then the Spartans face the Immortals, which I am not going to cover because I don't want to make this video too long, and I don't think they are that interesting. Besides, the action sequences of their fight with the Immortals are, in my opinion, the worst of the film. And then, we see them fight many different nations of Xerxes' empire, but the Spartans don't care, even when the Persians release a giant rhinoceros, which the Spartans have never seen, by the way. They don't care, and they let Astynos, their youngest and most inexperienced soldier, be the one who handles the rhino. What does that tell you about the rhino? He is child's play for the Spartans. Then we see what the narrator calls magicians. Probably alchemists who unleash hundreds of bombs on the Spartans that still don't give a damn and keep on blocking them with their shields. Seriously, how durable are these shields? Each of the shields has blocked dozens of arrows, swords, and literal bombs. Michael Fassbender's character, Stelios as they call him, only second in coolness to Leonidas himself, performs some astounding front rolls to dodge the bombs and manages to get close to the magicians. He gets rid of them with this legendary jump. His vertical is as good as Jamoran's, and he really had no need to jump so high. He could have gotten the point across just fine. We also see this horrifying looking fellow who is used by Xerxes as a living guillotine. It's easy to miss because everything is so exaggerated in this movie that you lose the sense of scale, but this guy is like 2.5 meters tall, or 8 feet for the Americans. How could we explain this monstrosity? Maybe he was born with a birth defect that the Persian Empire harvested in order to have their demonic executioner. What if his bones were manually sharpened over time? Can you imagine that? He doesn't have hands because they shaved his bones. What's interesting is that he doesn't seem to behave like a normal human. He looks like he's always growling. He's probably kept in some sort of cage, only being let out to perform that disturbing ritual execution. The meaning behind his existence is being a perverted religious tool. And sharpening his bones didn't seem to be enough. They also had to add a BDSM collar to his neck and all those piercings. My guess is that he was born without feet and without hands, and instead of throwing him off a cliff like the Spartans would have done, or maybe taking care of him, they decided to apply their mischievous alchemy that turns their skin white while they started to modify his body. Maybe he was selectively bred, and all his ancestors served the ritualistic purpose of being the human guillotine. There's a deleted scene that would have been placed right in between the segment and the rhinoceros one. Maybe it is because it isn't fully rendered, but not even the director, Zack Snyder, could take it seriously. We see a giant, and this giant is actually at least 5 meters tall. A real giant, not a pseudo one, like the so-called Uber Immortal. This giant is physically modified like the Executioner. He's got no hands in the same way that the Executioner has got no feet. We see an archer on top of the giant. He's pretty skilled as he's blasting arrows with nice speed and accuracy. The archer takes some nasty fall damage, but the Spartan still considers him enough of a threat to finish him off, even though the poor archer has probably got more broken bones than arrows left. Ignoring the obvious absurdity of the Spartan cutting the giant's leg as if it was butter, think about this. Who's more likely to want to fight back? The archer who just got his spine broken, or the alchemy-enhanced giant who cannot see a thing, has no elbows, and still marches straight to fight? Before continuing with 300, I feel like I need to give some credit to the original 300 Spartans movie. I mentioned it before, criticizing its display of the Persian army, and although those comments were 100% earned, the movie still has a lot of remarkable aspects. The whole Thermopylae fight has got actual realistic military strategies, and for some reason, Leonidas looks like Jimmy McNulty from The Wire, which is funny because Dominic West is in 300. And Leonidas in this movie is just too chill. He never gets emotional, he's always nonchalant. He's like Winston Wolfe from Pulp Fiction, but from ancient Greece. Maybe you missed it, but there's a brief moment in the 300 from 2006 when the Spartans are on their way to Thermopylae when we see a Spartan playing the flute. In the 1962 version, the 300 Spartans brought with them an entire group of flautists, and in the end of it all, when they are ambushed, they try to get to Xerxes in a suicide mission, and guess what? The flute boys are right with them. They don't want to get killed without their soundtrack. But you know, the main thing that I like about the 1962 movie is that it's just full of cool lines of dialogue.
Pick out 30 men for me, all good swimmers.
I could swim the Ephors River when I was a boy of 4.
No, again.
Enemy is on the move, sir. Drawing near to us.
Good. It also means that we are drawing nearer to them.
I don't know what to do. Take hold of yourself. Sparta gives her women more freedom than any state. In return, it demands strength.
How many men for your escort?
A Spartan king needs no escort to talk to a mere Persian.
For 6 days I watched them pass. 6 days. I ran out of numbers and still more of them came. They're drinking the rivers dry. And at night, there are more of their campfires than there are stars in the sky.
Good. When I was a boy, I always wanted to reach the stars with my spear.
Frank Miller saw the 300 Spartans as a kid, and at some point he decided he wanted to do a dark and exaggerated adaptation of that story, and that's where we got the 300 comic. The 300 Spartans is not precisely historically accurate, so if you do an over-the-top version of that movie, it's not hard to see why it will not be a good snapshot of the historical event, especially when you take into account that the movie is even more fantastical than the comic. There are no weird white-skinned monsters in the comic. Do you remember the Executioner? In the comic, he's just a dude with an axe. I'm not gonna lie, it takes a lot of balls not only to adapt a comic into a movie, but to make the live-action adaptation even more extravagant. The only thing of the comic that they toned down in the movie was Ephialtes. If you thought he looked bad, wait until you see his comic counterpart. Yeah. I really like the moment where we see the Spartans training. They are performing strict one-arm push-ups with the Spartans standing in their back. This is absolutely crazy. I don't know if you have ever done calisthenics, but one-arm push-ups are a big deal when you perform them with a strict technique. Being able to do those with a full-blown Spartan on top of them is the exact type of strength feat that I would expect from these guys. It's something that almost no human on earth can do, but it's not absolutely unbelievable. There could be someone able to perform these strict one-armed weighted push-ups. It's like, I believe that we have the potential to get that far. Overall, the comic is pretty good. There are some stunning panels, that's undeniable. But I cannot really say that the art style is the best for the story. My sensations are that this is a solid artwork, but I don't have this satisfaction of knowing that nothing could have been done better. But enough chat about the comic. Let's continue right where we left. As we all know, sadly, unfortunately, tragically, the Spartans were betrayed and ambushed. But it was worth it, because otherwise we would not have gotten this disturbingly inspiring bit of dialogue with Leonidas, in which he orders his men to die with him.
Oh, we will stand and fight and die.
Seriously, Leonidas looks so insane in this scene, but I say it in the best of ways. He has never commanded so much respect as in here. I would trust this man with my life 1000 times. Then we get to the beautiful callback of the heightened sense of things dialogue.
It's not fear that grips him, only restlessness. Gulls cawing, the steady breathing.
He throws his spear at Xerxes, and we see these gorgeous frames of the spear advancing through the mirrors of Xerxes' stairs. The scene is really cool, but if you think about it, it's weird for Leonidas to miss. Remember the scene we discussed of the Persian messenger getting hit by a spear 100 meters away? Why was a random Spartan able to hit a target at that distance, while King Leonidas couldn't hit Xerxes at a much smaller distance? Maybe they should have made Xerxes be further away, or add some kind of obstacle or setback that impeded Leonidas from performing the throw. Overall, 300 is a great movie. It's got its weird things that arguably work against it, like the many white-skinned monsters or the deformed Ephors, but overall, 300 is an enormous success of a movie. And when I say that, what I mean is that it is one of the rare comic book adaptations that manage to successfully translate the strengths of the comic format to the screen. It's stylized to the point of exhaustion, and as over the top as it can possibly be. But I guess it just works. Whenever I watch it, I cannot avoid getting hyped in the action scenes. It's one of the only live-action materials that make me feel like I'm watching an anime. And I really appreciate that, because there ain't barely any movies like this. 300 is one of those scarce times in life when everything just works out and we end up getting the best possible product with barely any drawbacks.